in the early 50s, soon after the establishment of the State of Israel. My father was sent to North Africa by the Jewish Agency to promote the country and encourage Jews to immigrate to the newly born state. In one of these trips, he arrived to Tunis, and that's where he met a local person who asked him where he comes from. My father answered, "From Jerusalem." And this man looked at him with an amazement and declared with utter conviction, "You must be mistaken, sir. Everyone knows that Jerusalem is way up in the sky. You can't have come from the country with the city above the sky." This notion is no ignorance by any means. As during the early Middle Age, wait a minute. Yeah, I will leave it like this. Okay, now I know. This notion is no ignorance by any means. As during, yes. Oh my God, I left the first part off. I'll start from the beginning with your permission. I see I forgot President Trump. Okay, with your permission, I'll just start with the president here. On December 6, 2017, the US President Donald Trump formally announced the United States recognition of Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, and ordered the planning of the relocation of the US Embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. It's all over the news even now. His announcement reversed nearly 7 decades of American foreign policy, and also surprised and then was wall-to-wall criticized by all the majority of international political leaders, including the European Union foreign policy chief. Shortly later, the United Nations Security Council Assembly passed a condemnation motion of Trump's announcement for 128-9 versus 9 with 35 abstentions. What a mess. And this is my question. So to whom does the city belongs? And who's to decide if it's the capital of Israel or not? Okay? And now I will continue with the first part. So as I told you, in the 1950s, my father was sent to North Africa to introduce the new country and to encourage people, Jewish people, to come to the new land. And then this person told him that you can't come from Jerusalem, that comes above the clouds, okay? And now to my next slide. So here it is. So this notion was no ignorance by any means. As during the Middle Ages, Jerusalem was very creatively depicted in the Christian world as the gateway to heavenly worlds. Between the 4th to 5th century, St. Ambrose described Jerusalem as a typical Roman city with a wall, towers, and gates, and in its center, a large gate which appeared to be the gate to heaven, signifying the redemption that the fortunate few believers that we can go there. In my view, as an ethnologist, it's in many senses equivalent to the legendary belief of the portal of Isle of Avalon, for any of you who's familiar with the Isle of Avalon, and the land of happiness that is located in the Glastonbury in England. Both locations represent a passionate blend of reality and fantasy, layered in generation after generation of creative dreamers. While this thought jumped instinctively into my head, I decided to check whether anyone else had thought of it, and indeed found a book comparing exactly the symbolic meaning of the two. It appears that the special place which Glastonbury occupies in the English sacred geography is based on a distinction inherited from the very early Celtic Church, and is acknowledged in its legendary claim and title, England's Jerusalem. And I quote, "Glastonbury is a place set in a mythical landscape with the sacred springs and holy mountains. The site seems to attract to itself spontaneously the attributes of the archetypical holy city of cosmological world center or city of revelation." The most popular description of Christian Jerusalem is deriving the city into two spheres, the earthly city and the heavenly city. Together they comprise what St. Augustine defines as the city of God. That's from the 12th century already. According to which, as I mentioned earlier, heavenly Jerusalem will be paradise district for the true believers. Based on the New Testament, at the end of days, heavenly Jerusalem will descend to earth and take the place of earthly one below. And I quote, "And the city had no need for the sun, neither of the moon, to shine in it, for the glory of God did lighten it. At this stage, it is empty, waiting for the final day of judgment, as a bride adorned for her husband, in the word of Revelations. About 1,000 years earlier, during the first Iron Age, long before the Christian image of heavenly Jerusalem and earthly Jerusalem was conceived, the city was described by Prophet Isaiah as a single entity known to be geographically located in the spiritual center of the world. According to Isaiah, chapter B, and I quote here, I'm not sure if you can see it, yeah. For out of Zion shall go forth the law and the word of the Lord from Jerusalem. Or we are told that all nations shall gather unto it in the name of the Lord of Jerusalem. The name of Jerusalem, I'll put a song, and in between I'll ask you something. Okay, just leave it as it is. So it will be in the background, and then I'll tell you something about it. Okay. This is a song that actually... And then repeatedly the song just repeats that sentence that is translated here. And one word about the singer, this is Shlomo Artzi, is the Israeli Sting. Right, okay, very, very famous pop musician, pop artist. And when I looked for a song that would be, in one hand, biblical, and a bit religious, and on the other hand, would be more popular, I was surprised to find it, find our Sting to sing it. I can tell you another thing. I was looking for a couple of sentences from the Bible to find the words of Jerusalem. You know how many times I found the word Jerusalem in the Bible? Give a number. Give a number. 600. So I just had to search and find a nice song. Okay, we'll proceed. If you want to have a copy of the Humanities song, let you have it later. Okay. Like this, right? No. Oh, okay. Later, stimulated by the verse of geography of the prophecy of Yechezkel, this is Jerusalem, I've set it in the midst of nations, the countries are all around her, about her. This message was visually translated not only to a spiritual centrality, but received topography. Representation by the word geography map artist, who drew the city physical location in the center of the world, as it is known at that time. It's a city in the desert, somewhere in the Middle East, that obtains a universal sacred geography status and referred us as the navel point of the world, or as I wrote here in Latin, Umbilicus Mundi, the center of the world. What you can see here, this is a map from the 15th century, actually from 1563. It's a German map. You can see Jerusalem right here in the center. Well, I'll just stand on the side and you'll trust me. You can see the central of the flower. This is Jerusalem. And around it are the three continents that were known between the 12th to 13th century, okay? So the 12th, 13th century, they believe the map looked like this, when there is Europe, Asia, and Africa, like a leaf, okay? But then the map was drawn and reorganized again after America was discovered. So here's America on the corner, like a dot, right? Like a spot. And you have England over there. And yes, we knew that we found Scandinavia, so it's over there, just another dot in the middle of the ocean. The geographical location of Jerusalem in the center of the world can be, well, I'll just jump over it because I told you all of that. The notion of Jerusalem as utopia, the Jerusalem Avalon Island, that was cherished in the Christianity, was embraced and later adopted by the Muslims as well. And again, as the city always does, it inspired miraculous, legendary images and fantastic tales. Islam, in this sense, was the last Abrahamic religions to crown the city as sacred domain, third in importance after Mecca and Medina. According to Islamic tradition, During the 7th century, the Prophet Muhammad, the founder of Islam, flew miraculously from the hidden cave near Mecca all the way to Jerusalem. In his magic horse, El-Burak, that was given to him by the angel Gabriel, legend has it that once Muhammad received the commandments of the prayers in the 7th heaven, he came back to earthly Jerusalem, accompanied by Abraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, and all the prophets of Israel, to pray together in the Holy Land. El-Burak then transported Muhammad back to Mecca. Over thousands of years, the city and its archetypical cosmological world center myth stimulated many world leaders to conquer her. They came and they left and they were defeated, but those who followed them. Just to name a few: Persian Koresh, Alexander the Great, Julius Caesar, Richard Coeur de Lion, Salah ad-Din, Napoleon, Caesar William, and the British general Edmund Allenby, who freed the city from the Ottoman Empire. But in addition to those, and in even greater determination, the Jerusalem fever, as it is known, took its victim from cultural agents as geographers, cartographers, traders, architects, and city planners. Perhaps even more significantly, she, as it is referred in Jewish religious literature, inspired countless poets and faith dreamers who travel across the world to witness the miraculous healing powers of the holy city. But imaginary illusions are one thing, and reality is another. And sometimes reality bites, or might be very painful. Between the 19th to 20th century, some of the greatest writers of the time visited the city. And we're all disappointed from the unbearable gap between the colorful dreamland and the earthly municipal city they saw with their own eyes. In their visit in 1867, Mark Twain mocked the American pilgrim's companion traveling with him with his well-known sarcasm and regarded the profound religiosity as a farce, naming them ridiculously naive. But others did not find it amusing at all, and they were all devastated by the depth of violent filth and neglect of the city under the Turkish regime. William Thackeray, you know, the author of Vanity Fair, in 1848, Gustave Flaubert, 1851, Herman Melville, 1857, just to name a few, did not expect to see the ruins of the city, and Melville said, "The city is naked and desolated, like dough that did not swell." But probably the most tragic shock reaction occurred to Nikolai Gogol, the giant Russian grotesque writer, who following his visit in 1848 had a nervous breakdown, diagnosed with, I quote, psychotic relapse associated with religious excitement. Again, the Jerusalem fever took its victim, a disease that he now rename and refrain as psychiatric professional writing as Jerusalem syndrome. People who are diagnosed with the syndrome suffer from a mental disorder caused by a combination of anticipation, disappointment, and delusion. In the city only, an average of 40 tourists a year are hospitalized and diagnosed, but it can be manifested around the world. Hundreds of people are suffering from the syndrome, temporarily lose of sanity, that's what they say about it, regarding themselves as messengers of God, or reincarnation of an ancient religious mystical persona, thereby believing they are sent to spread their message about apocalypse, or Gog and Magog, as we say it, to the millennium. And you know, the war between the forces of light and the forces of darkness, and the redemption and bringing the Messiah. So it is obvious that the city of Jerusalem is not in any way beyond the clouds, nor beyond any international political interest dispute. Actually, in its 3,000 years, it's an ongoing process. Yet President Trump's announcement triggered a political storm reaction by Western leaders, and followed by news headlines for a few days until another drama came and pushed it aside. The main question discussed globally was who crowned the President Trump to claim the ability to end the political dispute over the sovereignty of this ancient city in one Gordian knot proclamation. What I suggest here is to this distinguished forum is to use this proclamation as an opportunity and to open to intellectual, profound cultural dialogue and activity process. So how to preserve together this unique, holy, multicultural, complex city and protect it from its destroyers? I put aside the formal policymakers' diplomacy, as I doubt its true motivations. To my understanding, the extreme and loud and negative political debate against the declaration is part of a larger geopolitical conflicting interest and manipulation, arm wrestling combat between civilization and world leader emperors. Who dominates the world and who plays on our side, on the other side? And besides, who is leading Jerusalem, who is ruling the city, was decided about 50 years ago. Before I put you a song, I'll say the phrase again. In May 15, 1967, the night after the Israel 19th Independence Day, the annual Hebrew Song Festival was held in the city of Jerusalem. In addition to the song that was completed in the competition, the mayor of the earthly municipal Jerusalem, Teddy Kollek, requested to add 5 songs from 5 different composers, which were to be performed during the intermission and the counting of the votes. The chosen songs were invited by the leading Israeli composer of the time. One of them was Naomi Shemer, right there on the corner. A composer who is considered the Israeli first lady of song poetry. And on that evening, Yerushalayim Shel Zahav, Jerusalem of Gold, that she wrote and composed, was immediately the unofficial national anthem of Israel. I'll put the song in a minute. The song lost the page. The song described the Jewish people's never-ending longing to return to Jerusalem and was performed by an unknown young singer, Shuli Natan, whom Shemer chose thanks to her daughter, who heard her earlier, about a month earlier. She heard her in a competition on the radio, over the radio, for young musicians, young singers. And she performed with a crystal clear voice the song that put everybody on that evening. Nobody remembered the festival. Everybody remembered that song. Song everybody hears. Everybody knows it. From kindergarten you sing that song. Very, very popular. So I'll leave it because she has a nice voice, right? Crystal clear. Yeah, absolutely. She was maybe 19 at that time. She was just standing on the stage with a guitar and everybody were in tears. Okay. At that time, the old city was still controlled by the Hashemite kingdom of Jordan, and many holy sites were desecrated and damaged during that period under the Jordanian control. Jews had been banned from the old city, and at least, and later it was said that Naomi Shemer longings were prophetic, as Shuli Natan's voice opened heaven's gate, because 3 weeks later the 6 days war opened, and Jerusalem is what we call liberated, and was reunited, the east and west sides of the city. I'll jump and I'll say, I'll stop. If you want, I'll put it later, but yeah. If you insist, I'll put it again. Yeah. So the city of Jerusalem, as you understand, is undeniably real and is what Monty Python might have presented us, and now for something completely different. The challenge that should be put in front and discussed wordly and profoundly is cultural diplomacy in its nature and requires us, its agents and ambassadors, to lead a civilized cultural solution. In his 2007 article, John Lankowski refines cultural diplomacy as means of exchange of ideas, information, art, and the other aspect of cultural among nations and people in order to foster mutual understanding. Such an attempt is being done nowadays in our Department of Informational Science, in the department in my university, Ilan, presented to the Time Machine Europe. And I'll quickly show you the project. And since we are short in time, I'll just explain what it is, or you can see the mission over there. What it will do in a 3D, it will show the map of Jerusalem, and you go over a scale, on a digital scale, and you can just go back to each and every period of Jerusalem, of the city. And what I suggested them is to add ethnologists, to add folklore and storytellers, writers as my critics as myself. And we're going to join them as a team, and we're going to add to those stories, to those regions of Jerusalem of the 3,000 years period, to add the stories and the narratives and the folklore of the Muslims and the Christians and the Jews and all the other cultures that were along the years. Originally, cultural diplomacy seeks to harness these wide variety elements and to influence foreigners, people who are familiar with the other culture's object. But here, we have a new challenge. Jerusalem is not like Glastonbury Avalon, as it is much more than a single thread of one ancient cultural heritage to its modern development. Jerusalem is a city with no geographical strength, with no geographical, strategical, earthly importance to humans, no oil, no seaport, nothing. It's in the desert, but much more. It holds a universal spiritual importance. The opening sentence of the excellent book, Jerusalem, the biography by Simon Montefiore, is History of Jerusalem is the history of the world. Apparently, every person in the civilized world hold in his hearts a piece of Jerusalem. So how can we, cultural agents, challenge the diversity and still globally benefit from it? Naturally, each nation has its own understanding, and again, I'll just cut it short and say it in 1 minute. Each nationality and each culture has its own understanding on how should the problem be solved or how it should be handled. And I can tell you what I've done in the past 10 years. I'm the head of it's called the Universal Monotheism Center in my university. And over these 10 years, we've organized interreligion. You can see here, we've organized an event for the Jews who were deported from Spain in the 15th century. So it was in Spain with the Pope. He didn't arrive. It was the Pope, Ratzinger, who resigned 2 weeks later. So we understood why he didn't show up. And the chief rabbi of Israel, I've organized events with Jews and Christian and Jews, Christian, and Muslims. And in all our events and our activities, we ask how can we put aside the differences and the extremists and sit together and talk about what unites us and what can we share together, okay? This one we held in China. We also had events with the Chinese government and Chinese authorities, and this will be the latest development. And in this May, my university going to declare, and the board of Board of Trustees going to declare my center to proceed and to be a bigger center. And former Minister of England, Prime Minister Tony Blair, going to work with us on this project. And we aim to activate, really, to work on faith and globalization. All the activity that has to do with faith and globalization, and to bring people together. And I think the role of cultural diplomatists like yourselves, that comes from all over the world, have a very active role in this assignment. Maybe a last sentence and I'll conclude. I had so much to tell you. Okay. I believe it's our generation ability and therefore our responsibility to bring a message of tolerance and cultural and religious diversity. And the first step might be symbolically making heavenly Jerusalem descend to the earthly city and finally bring peace and tranquility to all. Thank you.